This is hell.
The occupation has been devastating, not only on the people of the occupied territory, but also on their land, which they depend upon for their food and water. Yet, while the conditions only get worse, Palestinians become more resilient. Here to report to us, correspondent Anuradha Mittal reports to us on all things concerning land development around the world, and Anuradha led the team on the new Oakland Institute report, Palestine for Land and Life. Anuradha is founder and executive director of the Oakland Institute. Welcome back to This Is Hell, Anuradha.
Thank you so much for having me again, Chuck.
Always great to hear your voice. You can find out more about Anuradha's group by going to oaklandinstitute.org, and you can follow Anuradha on Twitter at Mittal Oak. That's Mittal OAK. So your new report, Palestine for Land and Life, states in its overview that this whole thing started as a project examining the impact of the occupation on agricultural livelihoods with a special focus on land, water, and seeds. But the research quickly became about everyday life under occupation, the use of laws and military orders which subjugate Palestinians, and the struggle to sustain livelihoods in this context. To you, what explains why this report shifted from a report on the occupation's impact on the land and agriculture to a larger examination of the occupation's impact on everyday life? How much is occupation every part of every life at every moment in the occupied territories?
Well, Chuck, I think for us as a policy think tank that is dedicated to looking at land issues, agricultural development issues, we had constantly been asked that how come we don't look at land issues in Palestine? And for many of us, we refuse or only see the issues in the Middle East as an issue of conflict, see it as an issue, a way too polarizing issue. So when we went in to look at it using the lens of land and agriculture, what it means, you had to deal with everyday occupation and everyday occupation of livelihoods and lives itself. So whether it is looking at the livelihoods of people who are in a refugee camp since 1948, barely a few miles away from their homes, but the fact that they cannot return to those lands now, it has a huge impact on their livelihood. The fact that the wall is right there, which prohibits, their any kind of opportunities to employment, that is a fact you have to look at. Similarly, being in Jenin, when you are visiting villages and you're meeting farmers whose majority of their lands are on the other side of the wall, that they can access perhaps once a week or during the harvest time, a couple of times during the week, or when the crops are ready and suddenly the wall, gates are open and the wild boars can come in. This is not just a mere instance that just happened, but it is an everyday occurrence that does happen, which is impacting lives and livelihoods of the Palestinian communities. So whether it is homes being demolished in Jerusalem because of this whole schizophrenic system of area A, B, and C, the fact you're in area C, on your land you can't construct a home, or the fact that you're in Nabi Saleh and you find that your access to your own water springs has now been restricted as a settlement, which, by the way, is considered illegal by all international laws, suddenly has taken away your land and water. We had to not just look at people's access to land or what the impact or the agriculture is doing when you find thousands of your olive trees are being uprooted. You have to look at the source behind it all, and that is the occupation.
When I think of a wall, maybe this is just simple semiotics or whatever, I think of like the Berlin Wall, which is separating two populations, two sides of a wall. When I think of the wall that Donald Trump is talking about along the U.S.-Mexico border, I think of a wall that's just separating two populations. When I read your report, I had a much better understanding of how horrible life is on the other side of the wall when it comes to the occupied territories, because it isn't just a wall running down the middle and separating two sides. At times, you describe how it's a wall that actually completely surrounds a group of people. It's not a wall, so you have one side of the border and they have the other side of the border. It's a wall that keeps you enclosed in an area. How fair is it to consider or to make the claims that the occupied territories, that Palestine is like a prison. Is that fair, or is that oversimplifying a description for what the people actually go through every day?
Well, Chuck, I think what you just said, I am so glad that finally our multimedia series and reports have conveyed that. You've said it much better than I could say it. When we envision a wall, as you said in case of Germany, or you think of the wall that Trump is proposing, you think of two sides of land equal and a wall running through it, though it has devastating consequences. But in the case of the occupied territory in Palestine, takes different forms, though it was suggested as a barrier to provide security to Israel. But it has really become a means of encircling, and you said it, creating cities that are where the people there are living a life under siege, or it is really a prison, sometimes isolating you from the other Palestinian villages, your communities, your families, and the fact that it can take hours and days to be able to visit your family in the other village, because suddenly you're an isolated village encircled by the wall, is pretty stunning. The other thing is that the wall, which started as a separation barrier for security, deliberately comes into the West Bank, violating the 1967 agreement to take as much land as it can from the Palestinians. These are the fertile fields. These are the beautiful homes. This is the lives of people. And it is an everyday phenomena. It is there with its watchtowers, with its barbed wires, with its... at the same time, what a report does is not just talking about the everyday despair, as you mentioned earlier. It's about the resilience of the Palestinian communities and villages on the other side. So whether it is creating, in the refugee camp, a playground for the children who have no space, where they have seen young people being killed by the Israeli Defense Forces, or you have the imagination, and which I think is the basis for first creation of political ideas, of children talking about their ability to become a kite and fly over that wall, or whether it is beautiful political graffiti on those walls clearly stating that this is occupied territory, but yet it remains the land of Palestine. And at the same time, despite the farmers who have lost their lands, we also talk about Canaan Palestine, an organization which is providing fair trade, organic, produce markets in the West, enabling some 15,000 Palestinian farmers to have good livelihoods. So in the face of this oppression, in the face of this everyday life surrounded by the wall, checkpoints, everyday resilience to take back the lives, livelihoods, and dreams for the Palestinians.
You have done a lot of studying of land use and movements that are focused on land use around the world. You were just talking about the resilience of the Palestinian people within the occupied territories. How unique is Palestinian attachment for a land that has been so devastated by 70 years of occupation? How common is it to find the kind of resilience you and your team witnessed when reporting on the occupied territories in other parts of the world? Or is this commonplace that people are this connected to their land that even though 70 years of encircled harassment and destruction, that they still want that land? Is that unique, or is that something that you do find all over the world, that people have their greatest attachment to land and the people who are connected to that land?
Well, Chuck, Palestine, which is predominantly an agrarian economy, people have always grown their food. The attachment to land is a place where they grow olives. Palestine, Canaan, which is known as the land of milk and honey. The attachment to land is no different as we have experienced with communities in Ethiopia or in Papua New Guinea. So this conflict is not based on religion. This is really about land for life. And that's why people stay. As you mentioned, this year marks 100 years of the Balfour Declaration, which created the Jewish homeland in Palestine. This is 70 years since Nakba, which means the catastrophe, the 47-48, when hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were forcibly removed from their homes. This is the 50th year of the 1967 war and the occupation of the West Bank and the Gaza. So when you look at that, you have to understand to say that too many years have passed and people shall move on is pretty ironic that the idea of the creation of a homeland was based on the desire to return thousands of years later. So for us to feel like it is too polarizing, that this is a conflict based on religion, is completely a myth. It is really based on a life, which is a struggle for life, for land, for liberty, and a life of dignity. When we showcase the losses that people have suffered from the loss of biodiversity, the crops that can actually survive in those extreme weathers under occupation, from biodiversity to childhood, it is all disappearing. And that is why it becomes very important for international community, a policy think tank like the Oakland Institute, to look at those issues, and that's exactly what we have done.
You were talking about the historical context, and the report states, according to Resolution 181, the Jewish state would be comprised of 56% of Mandate Palestine, the Arab state 44%, and the land around Jerusalem, including Bethlehem, would become an international area. Awarding the Jewish state a larger portion of land was reportedly based on an assumption that Jewish immigration to the region would increase. However, nearly half the population of the proposed Jewish state consisted of Palestinian Arabs who own nearly 90% of the land. Therefore, Nakba happens, and they were forced out of their homes, taken away from them by the burgeoning Israeli state. How much did Britain's Mandate Palestine, guaranteeing a Palestinian state, and Britain's Balfour Declaration, guaranteeing a Jewish homeland, create the problem that persists to this day? Can we blame what is happening today on 1917 and then post-war Britain getting a policy wrong?
Well, there's no denying the catastrophe and the kind of horrors that were carried out in Europe during the Second World War. We cannot deny them. But it is very interesting, Chuck, as you pointed out, and I heard over and over again, that how Europe decided to, resolve its problem without really looking at how the state of Israel was created. And more important, even today, how we continue to look the other way as policy after policy of the state of Israel has been one of stealing land, taking as much land as possible from the Palestinians and hoping no Palestinians are on that land. So it could have been, the creation, when you have two states, the respect for the other, everyday violation of international laws, forgetting the international mandate of also the right to return, the right of the Palestinian refugees to go back to their homes. None of those promises have ever been fulfilled. Those UN resolution after resolution has become nothing else but a meaningless set of words which are not carried out. While the international community has clearly declared these settlements to be illegal, today the government of Israel is carrying out more and more settlements and, in fact, making many of those illegal settlements into legally recognized settlements by the government of Israel. And this continuous theft of land from the Palestinians, this continuous disregard for the land and liberty and lives of Palestinians, and to make it just a problem of Israel and Palestine, while the government of the United States continues to pump endless amounts of monies as military aid to Israel, makes it a responsibility of each one of us to correct the wrong and to ensure that people can have lives back, they can have their land back, and they can have the liberty and freedom back.